Ladies and gentlemen, guys and girls, welcome back to the Age of Warfare podcast. This is episode number 46, getting ever so close to the big 50. And today we got a fun topic, an interesting one. We're going to be talking about the Cossacks and the history of Eastern Europe and the region of Poland, Ukraine, and Russia. And we might even touch on a little bit of Belarus as well. We might touch on that as well. So, and Lithuania, because that's a pretty important region in Eastern Europe as well. But anyway, guys, before we get started, we are going to take this time to say hello, guys. I hope you enjoy the show. And Aiden, as always, how are you today, my man?
I'm doing well. It's quite quiet at work at the moment, so university hasn't quite got back. So I've been on my normal shorter hours, so I've got loads of stuff done, and I've been flicking around. So I have managed to find lots of images and rummage through my books and things as well. So this episode is going to be great. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, but this is going to be a good. I actually have a soft spot for Eastern European history, and yes, I know some of you might get tired of the video game references, but this is going to be one of those episodes where we have to bring up Cossacks, because that was my first introduction to the Ukrainians, the history of the Ukrainians, Cossacks, which, in case for those who are not big gamers, that is a PC computer game developed by GSC Game World, which ironically, as we discussed before, is a Ukrainian developer. So, that's it. So, but really good game. I love the detail, really excellent detail in the game as well. Agents played it as well, so he can tell you, Ukraine was one of my favorite nations to play as. So, the big bad Dukes, with the muskets, and if you upgrade them fully with all the academy upgrades and the barrack upgrades, they were like the best shooters in the game. They have like over 80 attack with something ridiculous like that.
They were the equivalent of what the British ones, especially in Cossacks too, where they had the Highlanders, but they were a mix of the rifles as well, and they were just as good and cheaper as well. Yeah. It was so good. So I used to play Russia in Cossacks 1, actually, and Cossacks 3, which is
Russia was pretty dumb.
Just the Strelets and the way that you built the house to get your troops. Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I hated about Russia was all the good units were in the 17th century. Once it progressed to the 18th century, it was just vanilla, vanilla units. Like, all the fun units on the 17th century. But okay, enough about Cossacks, because we could talk about that the entire time. Obviously, you guys may know Ukraine because of the war in Ukraine right now. But what you might not know is that Ukraine has had a bloody history. They've had quite the unfortunate history. They've always been in conflict. Well, and we got Dungeon Dan. Yes, sir. No, sorry. No, Mike, we said Dungeon Dan. We come on whenever Aiden gets home. I'm always ready, but sometimes I gotta wait for Aiden to get home and get settled, because the show isn't as fun without him. But anyway, guys. So Ukraine. So if you really want to go back in history about Ukraine, you can go as far back as the Kelvin Rus. If you really want to go back in time, I think that could be a good place to start.
Yeah, so, right, if we're starting there, one of the things to remember about, because I'm always the one to blame, Dan. The Kievan Rus came up. So you have, if you go up to, obviously, call them the Vikings, but it's not, it's the Scandinavian people.
Right,
And they were big on their trade and obviously their boats. And a lot of the initial Viking boats were shallow draft to get around the fjords and to navigate river systems. Obviously, they then had more seagoing vessels, and they upgraded them later on, modified their technology. Comes to the British Isles, more of Northern Europe, and then obviously Iceland, Greenland, and then the what's now northeast US, that area, which they call Finland. But over that period of time, they navigated some of these big rivers in Eastern Europe. So, if you the geography of Europe's pretty weird because it's separated by a series of big rivers that run from the north and then cut through, basically dividing the place into lines. So Europe technically stops as a continent in the east of the Volga River, which goes through Russia, which is why Russia is both European and Asian, because you have European Russia where the majority of people were. And it was only in the late 1700s that they pushed east. So the river that I'm talking about here on this map, to the right of the Kievan Rus, you see the dark line coming up from the Aral Sea that comes up all the way through. That's essentially the edge of Europe. So it's Kievan Rus was part of Europe. And right the way through the middle of that territory, coming down past what is now Estonia from south of Finland, going all the way through, you've got the rivers that go down into the Black Sea, where they used to trade with the Byzantine Empire. We've talked about the Varangian Guard before in several episodes, and that's how the Varangian Guard became formed. So they would go out raiding, trading, and things like that. Obviously, part of their raiding was capturing slaves, and these areas had various different tribes. So it was while Western Europe was starting to form states, Eastern Europe, especially into this area, was incredibly forested and not so well developed. They didn't, obviously, this is partly due to the Roman Empire in the West. There was something to, well, we had cities before, we're going back to that to form this nation thing, whereas in the East, you end up still with this tribal thing going on. So when they came down, they ended up forming alliances with these tribes and then started settling in these areas because it's cold with a lot of trees and somewhere you can have your boats, which is basically the same as Scandinavia, especially in the north as well. So Novgorod being one of the important places in there that comes up time and time again in the sagas. If you watch Vikings, the TV show, or Vikings Valhalla, more importantly, Vikings Valhalla focuses on this area, this trip down through the Kievan Rus. One of the most interesting things about this is this area is where we know some of the Viking religious ceremonies, because we have very little in history actually from Scandinavia. But there was a man called Ibn Fadlan who was obviously Arabic, and he was a scholar from Baghdad. And he went up through the Byzantine Empire and went back through this area of the Kievan Rus. So he saw a lot of these, and his writings are where we know about what happened at Viking funerals and some of the more religious cultural aspects, because he wrote it down on his tour. He eventually then made it Scandinavia as well, which is where he's played by Antonio Banderas, of all people, in a film.
Wow.
But he's so we know more about the Kievan Rus. We know that it was settled by the Vikings. So think about places like Iceland, Greenland, not that we really want to bring that up at the moment, parts of Ireland, Scotland, and northeastern England as well later on as well, Danelaw. So you get this this culture that has, but it's then obviously mixed with the local culture. If you go to any of those places these days, you see that mix. Hello, Lee. And what you have is this mixing with the local tribal cultures in this area. So Kiev was the main place of it, and the Rus, because the Rus were the tribes of the area. Obviously, the Rus is where we get our root Russian from, but Rus was just tribal. It's a bit like saying they were Celtic.
Yes.
So it's like you think everything west of this, that's all Celtic. Everything east of this, that's all Rus. So it's just a different grouping, and that's all to do with tribal language and sort the root languages, if you're not talking about the Cyrillic languages, obviously, the root languages of the area when you're going back to the old ones. Finnish is a good example of this, of a language as part of that. Finno-Ugric group, if you want to get into language terminology. So what you end up with is this this area that sort of expands from the river. So they go east and west across it and sort of build up this huge territory. And if you look at the size of it on this map, that is essentially the combination of France, Germany. Basically, if you ignore Spain and you take that blob and then you stick it across Western Europe, it's from the western edge of the Kievan Rus all the way to Spain, covering that entire area of what we now conventionally think of as Europe, as the core of Europe. So this is a huge tracts of land. And one of the interesting parts of this is a lot of this is as I said, it's this woodland areas and rivers. So it's very Scandinavian. It's when you get into these southeastern parts of it, it's when you're getting into what is now Ukraine. So obviously Kiev, as we know, is the capital of Ukraine. That's quite north in modern Ukraine. But Ukraine also extends down further southeast. So you see the little yellow dots on our map. So you've got around here with the Byzantine Empire, where you've got the Crimean region.
Crimea.
Some of these dots up. So that little yellow blob is not far from Stalingrad, actually, oddly enough. Stalingrad's up that end of the world. And those areas, when you join up that areas to the west of that river, that big flat plain area is what's more modern Ukraine. And large areas for grain in the modern world, and for its oil, both sunflower oil and actual drive your cars oil. And it's also great territory for cavalry. Now, as we know, the Vikings weren't great into their cavalry. This is where we start getting into the Cossacks, because these tribes in this area, we've talked about before how we have these horse tribes that come out of the regions to the southeast, or the Caucasus regions, is where we're getting down to. So that mountain range that divides what is essentially the Byzantine Empire from what we now know as sort of like the Russia-Ukraine area, up through Georgia. So you've got all of these tribes, and it's through those plains they start coming across. So you've got this clash of these peoples, and you get these tribes that are building up and are mixing with this Kievan Rus, which is changing how people are. So you end up with the Kingdom of Novgorod later on as well, which is focused on this northern part. And then this Kievan, southern Kievan part separates slightly away from that. And obviously we're going to get into Poland as well, because that's where you get into this western Kievan Rus areas, and Prussia as well for part of it. But yeah, anyway, so this then brings us on to Angel, this image.
Yep, this is the Cossack. Obviously, so now we get into my introduction to the Cossacks, which was the video game. And there was a camp. I don't know if you ever played the Ukrainian campaign in the original Cossacks. Yeah. And I know the first mission is rough because you have to get to a Ukrainian outpost, and you got the Tatars attacking you. So so obviously, what the heck is a Tatar? So the Tatars are like, think of the Mongolians. They're like a descendant of the Mongol Empire. Because don't forget, at one point the Mongol Empire actually extended into the Ukrainian region, the Mongol Empire.
And to add to that as well, there's a Turkish aspect to them, like the Tatar and Turk, because they were Turkic peoples, which is that part of the Mongolian Empire, which it means that they're south of those Caucasus Mountains, going into what we now know as Turkey as well. So you've got this eastern aspect to a lot of these horse tribes as well, from the Mongolians, and then you get this more sort of central, as it were, aspect as well, where you get this mix. So you get the Tatars and the Cossacks they're the same, but they're not the same. They've got a lot of crossover, but because it's tribal, it's about groupings.
Yep. I remember in the game you had a one from the tutorials. You had the horse archers. Oh yeah, and you know
Mm.
how I hate horse archers in video games. But here we go. You had to go horse archers. Then you had to run to the outpost, and then they defend against the Turks. You know, so and then from there, and then after you beat the first campaign, you start moving into the opponent starts to threaten, and then this is where you get into the Ukrainians against the Polish, and then against the Russians. So what was the deal with the Ukrainians and the Polish? What made them fight amongst
So,
themselves?
one of the most interesting things about Poland is that Poland
Uh-huh.
has disappeared from the maps of history about a dozen times. It's shrunk to essentially little more than a city-state, and then grown back to the size it is now, and even larger. It was once the crowns of Poland and Lithuania were joined together, and they
Yep.
controlled
Mhm.
the Novgorod, as I said before. You had this whole connection. And there are large swathes of Poland that are also this land that's good for horses, which then leads us on to these chaps.
Yep. These are the wing hussars. And if you play any video game with Poland, these are the most popular units in Polish history, the hussars. So the hussar was basically like a night cavalry that they were good for waiting. The hussar cavalry was your waiting cavalry. So if you play like Age of Empires 2, Age of Empires 3, Cossacks, the hussars, you always go to the enemy base and start harassing them. Uh, but the Polish, they had the wing hussar. So these were like more heavier the heavier version of the hussar. So this is like kind of your medium cavalry. Usually when you think about night cavalry and heavy cavalry, but then there was this medium cavalry in the middle.
So one thing that we'll get to a little bit later on, this gets defined very specifically once you enter the Napoleonic era. Really from the mid 1700s as we go on. So these
Mm-hmm.
chaps were around from their 1600s, so your 17th century. They were around from earlier. They came out of 13th, 14th, 15th century stuff, then developed. Were prominent in the 16th, 17th century, and in the earlier 18th century, and they were sort of formalized more like how you'd view a palace guard of how some
Right.
people look. So if you look at, say, the papal guards and how they're dressed, and
Uh-huh.
then it became sort of stuck at that time that this unit looked like this, and it was tradition that came in. So as you can see, they're a very distinctive look, and it was that distinctive look that they kept that going on later on. So you had Ritas as well. So in the 1600s, little thing here, so cavalry designations. This is the period where musketry on the battlefield is coming to the fore. So one of the easiest ways for me to explain this is to use
Uh-huh.
the English Civil War at the time. I mean,
Right.
there were like 7 of them, but the at the time you start off with your big blocks of pikes. So you have the 7 Years' War where these guys are involved in as well. You have these big blocks of pikes where you have some muskets on the side, and then you have your cavalry coming in. This gets more and more formalized. You then have different things happening. So in Spain, you have light infantry with swords and shields as well, which appear in Cossacks, the game. That's why that's
Yeah.
relevant.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You then have the different nations bringing on the 30 Years' War and 7 Years' War ideas. So you end up with cavalry, and then you realise that the muskets have got so powerful they can go through that that solid armour, and that suddenly stops being as effective. But it is still slightly effective. So what you see in the 1600s is people with solid breastplates, decent helmets, and then possibly some armor over their arms. So as you can see in this picture, they've already stopped with the armor on the legs, because that just stops your movement so much. But you've still got your helmets open faced quite often, because if a musket ball hits, what you're going to have on your face is metal. It's going straight through and killing you anyway. So you're better off with the vision. But the shapes of the helmets with the curves and the ear flaps, that's to stop sword cuts. So that's useful in a different context. The breastplates and the arms as well, again, it's areas to protect from swords, not the muskets. you end up something develops called dragoons. Now, a dragoon,
Dragoon, yeah.
we still have that terminology in the modern military. So the Scottish Dragoon Guards, based in Edinburgh, Scotland, part of the British military. A dragoon was a mounted infantryman, so it's someone who would ride to battle on the horse, get off, and then shoot. That was that actually comes out of a really early thing that happened in the 100 Years' War, the chevauchée. With the chevauchés, you end up with British archers on horses, and they'd ride to the battle, get off their horses. This then got formalised. Eventually, as you get to the Napoleonic period, they become on horses, but retain the dragoon musket, which is a carbine, and this is where you get the carbines coming into it. And they eventually lose the breastplates. But dragoons end up in that middle cavalry, and that's where these other guys have ended up, our winged hussars. So you get your lighter cavalry, which are your lancers, and your uhlans, which again from this area. Polish uhlans, very famous, and the Polish lancers, again very famous unit in the French army, oddly enough. And then you have the middle units, generally dragoons. Hussars could be light or heavy hussars, fit into the middle category. And your cuirassiers, which are your heavy cavalry with breastplates, and that's where breastplates are retained. And they take on that what was medium cavalry, then becomes the heavy cavalry. So this is classic. That is, I was trying to identify the unit. I'm not so good at that anymore. But
was it the Mongols that used never armor while on horseback to make the movements? Yeah, the Mongols. Yeah, but there was some Mongols that used like chainmail, heavier, like the heavier cavalry, like all the leading Khan, actually had heavier, like chain mail armor. But yes,
and you also get scale armor as well, which you got with the Hever Clibrianii from earlier on with the Byzantines and the Turkic cavalry. Clibrianii literally means oven men. So used to wear armor, the horses in armor.
But Mongols used never armor, and that was paramount because that's what made them so dangerous, because they were able to move fast. Now they wore heavier armor, they were obviously slower and easier to catch.
Exactly. So you do sometimes get the scale along with it, but it helps them move faster. Also, one of the things about armor that's quite interesting, I studied this in my master's. When you've got a bow, leather armor, if it's well made, is almost as good as metal armor. You're not losing much in the way of protection when you're fighting against archers, especially on horses. They're using relatively smaller bows, which is where we get the development of more powerful small bows to compensate. But especially earlier on, decently made leather armor is going to afford you as much protection as metal. And then as well, metal production facilities require sedentary towns as well. So obviously the Mongols didn't have the metal until they took towns, because you can't really do that when you're roaming around on horseback.
Now the Cossacks, right? We kind of have an idea who the Cossacks are, but what people may not know was they were different camps of Cossacks. They were different regiments of Cossacks, and one of the more popular ones, if you moved in Ukraine, were the Sich Cossack, or the Sapo. Yeah, I won't even try to pronounce that. Obviously, Zaporizhian Cossacks, or in Cossacks they call them the Sich Cossacks. These were the Ukrainian Cossacks.
So what's really interesting with this is, Zvezda, which is the company, these are models, and Zvezda is the company, it's a Russian model maker as well. That's where you get a lot of these models from this region. This is back when times were better. But if you notice so many things from this picture, you've got the curved swords, Turkey. Yep. You've got the top knots, Turkey. You've got the long moustaches, Turkey. You've got the even look at the footwear and the way that the clothing drapes down. You can see all of these influences that we associate with the Turks.
But the curved swords what gets me the most.
Yeah. Yeah, it's because that's a cavalry saber. What's interesting, everyone used curved swords as cavalry sabers. It was across the entire world that happened, especially by this middle period. Look at any
Yeah.
Napoleonic unit. You
Yep.
got the heavy cavalry saber was the only straight sword, and that was a very British thing. If you want sharp, that's the sword that he has, to give you an idea. But everyone else was using these curved swords because people saw these guys at work and went, you know what, that works. Let's all use that. And this Napoleonic era is really interesting for this. It's why you get all of these names from different areas for the units. Is because people started looking more at the history in these regions of areas and looking at the weapons and armor and skills that people had and going, let's just adopt it. It clearly works. They're clearly still using it 300 years afterwards when we've got guns. So let's use that.
And the X is, what are you drinking today, Aiden?
I am drinking Carlsberg Pilsner today because it's nice and light. It's only 3.4. 3.4%.
Nice, alcohol. All right, it's a nice night one for today's show. But I'm sure you've seen this, the Cossacks 3. Cossacks 3. Yeah, with the swords, the pistols. There goes the classic Cossacks muck. You can tell he's a Ukrainian Cossack, and you can definitely tell Cossacks 3 was developed by a Ukrainian developer. That's purely Ukrainian, 100%.
Yeah, it's like, I'm glad you showed those images together because the first one, Svesto are known for obviously its historical miniatures. They try and get it as historically accurate as they can, to a certain extent, obviously. But they're showcasing and how similar this image looks to what that historical image is. And that's one of the brilliant things about Cossacks is that they tried to make what you're seeing in the game as accurate to real life as possible. Obviously, with nods to all your troops are going to be the same color because it's a game and you need to be able to identify them by that. But however, right. So I've got pictures that are going to start coming up now as well.
But before we get to that, I want to talk about the Russian counterpart because the Ukrainians have the Shich Cossack and the Russians have what they call the Don Cossack, which you might be a little more familiar with the Don River of Russia, the Don Cossack.
Yeah, and let's share. Let's find this image. Right, so talking about Don Cossacks, we have obviously these images. So that image is actually late 17, early 1800s artwork. And there's a lot of these images around used for pictures of different regiments as well. So there's a couple that I can bring up here. So one of the interesting things about the Don Cossacks is there was. All right, so let's go into a little bit of Cossack history here. There was unification amongst certain tribes and trying to stay separate. And you had the empires and kingdoms that came out of like the Kievan Rus. So you had these allying with, you had Novgorod, you had Moscow, you had St. Petersburg, you had all of these areas. And initially they were essentially city-states before they formed Russia and everything. So you end up then with the Russia. What people need to remember is Russia was only formed in the 1500s, and it was only the 1600s where they started capturing the eastern areas as well. So obviously on the south, they're allying with these tribes that go all the way across. We'll get to Kazakhstan is quite famous when it comes to Cossacks as well. We'll come to that. But you end up with these tribes that are fighting between each other. And there is a split between these Cossack tribes where they sort of half of them go with Ukraine and half of them go with Russia. And it's across, remember before I said about the rivers, it's which side of this river you were on and their lands that they had. Those treaties and how those Cossacks fought with the Russian army at that time period. A lot of the Cossacks, even though they look Turkish, one of their enemies that they used to fight a lot was the Turks. So the Don Cossacks were very famous for this, and they were constantly fighting against the Turks. Whether they were supposed to or not, they were still doing that because they were autonomous. They then became, in the Napoleonic period, you used to have your infantry, your cavalry, and your artillery. You would then have your guard units. So everyone knows of Napoleon's old guard, especially at Waterloo with the big furry hats and things. The British Guard, you know that? Those these big furry hats. There was a whole thing for big furry hats, all right? And then you had, in Russia, you had the Guards division, and you had your standard Guard regiments with slightly different uniforms. But you also had part of that was the Cossacks of the Guard. The Cossacks of the Guard were mainly drawn from the Don Cossacks. And so this blue colour that they had became part of their uniform. It was very specifically part of that. And so they took their traditional dress and they made it a uniform dress as well. So there is a photograph of a Cossack. This one's latest, a 1920s one. But you can see how do we do this again? That's that button. It's this one. That one. And I need to go to, I think it's this. Yes. So this image here.
All right. Let's see. I gotta take that one out, and we're gonna put this one in.
Yeah. So this is a 1920s Cossack. This is a photograph of a Cossack. Now, if you look at the picture, it's like they've gone backwards a little bit, but there was a rebellion against the Soviets by the Cossacks, because the Cossacks were fiercely independent tribes, semi-autonomous tribes. This is still a thing today. Like even today in the Ukrainian war, you do have the separate groups of Cossacks that fight. I'll be bringing up an image of that after this. And that famous big furry hat thing became, I think, it made you look taller, but it was practical in that sense. Because you see, the saddle, that military saddle, that is very Napoleonic to the 1700s from the images we've seen before. The lance is the same type of lance they've always used. If you just look at the person and how they're dressed, yes, it's more formal as military in the 1920s as we know, and the rifle is clearly of that period. But you make that rifle into a musket, and then you make what they're wearing a little bit more flowing, and then they could be of any time period around then, like 100 years beforehand in the 1820s. They'd have looked basically the same. So it's quite interesting that we then have photographs of these people doing that. Now, so there's another one that I am going to show. So I'll stop sharing this one. And it's this one, right? So I've got, sorry about this, people. I've got so many tabs open. There we are. This.
All right, let's see. We got. Oh, okay.
Right. So this chap is, if people know anything about the modern war in Ukraine, this guy was the leader of one of the Cossack units fighting on the Russian side. There's many things to go into. By all rights, he wasn't a very nice chap. I'm pretty sure he's dead now because he was in a war. But modern military attire, that's a very standard AK. I mean, a very basic out-of-the-box AK. Modern military kit. However, look at the guy's heads. Same headdress, same beard, same style of beard. It's not even just he's got a beard. It's the style of the way he holds it. It has his moustache and the way he sculpts his beard. That is a classic Cossack thing. And that is a piece of military headgear as well. That is a very specific piece of military headgear. Now, something that's interesting throughout all of this is this shows that you've got this strong identity for the Cossacks. So we've gone all the way through from those really early ones now, all the way up to literally photos like this that you can find from like last year. It's quite interesting that you find those little bits throughout history of where people have got this very specific bit of gear. And in modern militaries, there are nods to these bits of gear. So if you look at the Guards uniforms of the British Guards regiments, the number of buttons on the front of their tunic, and then there's one with a little white bit on their collar. as well to signify what happened in one of the battles that they fought in. So you get these little nods on parade uniforms, but you don't often see in the military this happening. The closest that you'd see in the modern world would be turbans being allowed to be worn in the military, and even then they're made to resemble modern military colouring and things like that to fit in with everything else. But you don't see this as much, and the Cossacks is really the only group where you see this all the way through their history. They're wearing the same headwear that they were wearing when they were fighting the Turks in 1,000 years ago, and they're still wearing it today in a modern conflict, and they're still looking to the same people that are in charge, the same grouping, even though we've had all these nations come and go and all of the disruption in that region. They're still acting as a semi-autonomous state and always have done as well, which is one of the things that makes them super interesting. Okay. I probably got way more images in here somewhere. Right.
Now, let's take a step.
Let's take a move first, otherwise I'll be here for hours.
Yeah, let's take a bit of a step back because we got to get into how the Cossacks came to be. Because then this is where we get into the Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth that was created. Because then there was something. Obviously, we played as the Russians in Cossacks or Cossacks 3. The peasants are called serfs. Yeah. So I kind of wonder how did they come up with the name serf, and because it kind of started with the idea of the Commonwealth, and then they had serfdom. So serfdom is it's like peasants, but
it's so one of the things with that is you're going back to feudalism as a concept. So in the UK, as an example, England specifically, although it was other areas of the UK, and in France at the same time, you had this idea where if you were in charge of an area, you were ruling this area on behalf of the monarch who you saw fealty to, and then underneath you, you would have the people that you had to look after. You then had the different classes of people. Now, so peasant is the catch-all term. It could be different levels of peasant, but a serf is it's different levels of how much freedom that you have. So
right.
You have all the way at the bottom. People think, oh, yeah, peasants, they're the lowliest of the low, basically slaves. That was one class of peasant, and there weren't that many of them. You had these different levels. You had essentially autonomous peasants. Peasant just meant not nobility. You could be rich and still be a peasant. So this would be similar to what we were talking about with some of the Roman slaves who became incredibly wealthy and were still slaves. But it was about their freedom of movement and who they had to refer to. And it's one of the reasons for the Russian Civil War is feudalism was still alive and well in large parts of Russia from later on. And it was a thing that was common across the whole of Europe. And so during this period of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, you have this coming up as a big thing that is normal. It's the normal thing of that happening. So you have these people have a disconnected group, as we talked about before, right at the beginning. You have the Kievan Rus. So you've got all of these different peoples who share this common heritage. So you end up getting these pacts of different different kingdoms aligned with each other on various levels. So where we are, that's the setup for you. This image, really interesting as well. Do you want to go into this image, Angel?
Yeah, we can get into this image. Obviously, the Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth. So this was kind of a combination of the Kingdom of Poland, Ukraine, Belarus. Ironically, Belarus was in the mix as well, and then Lithuania, of course. And obviously, Poland and Lithuania joined forces. And then the thing is, we were talking about the serfs. The peasants who fought efforts to force them into serfdom. But now some of the serfs escaped, and they became what we call the Cossacks. They made up these little tribes, some of these Cossacks were peasants who escaped serfdom.
Yeah.
So that's another fun fact right there. And then
this is where we're talking about semi-autonomous groups. These are people who have that freedom. These
exactly. So I mean, and then Cossack, and then ironically, the Commonwealth they saw these Cossacks and kind of used them as mercenaries to fight some of their battles. But despite the Cossacks' military usefulness, the Commonwealth, dominated by, as you said, the nobility, refused to grant them any significant autonomy, instead attempting to turn most of the Cossack population into serfs. And then this is where you get the Cossack rebellions. Because, we might, oh no, we fought for you. We deserve some rights, you better give us our rights, man. We fought for you. And then when the nobility's like, man, it doesn't matter. You're below us. You're so far below us, we can step on you with our feet. And then it's like, we're not dealing with that.
Yeah. So one of the
that's the New York version of that's the New York version of what happened. So there you go. Get out of here,
But so one of the really interesting things about this map is that little place between between Poland and Lithuania at this time of Rus. Now, this is where we get into something incredibly interesting, which is going to go on a slight tangent. However, it's really quite amazing when you actually have a look through this. So I have, where did I put those images? I have them somewhere. I have closed them. No, I haven't. Here we are.
Take that down.
2 seconds.
No problem.
If it'll let me explore. Right. So, this is going to be a bit. Isn't going to be quite how I wanted to show it, but it would be that one. So, why am I showing this? Now, this is just the Battle of Waterloo, but this is Prussia. Now, what's very interesting about it is that little place is called Prussia.
Yeah,
it's a little part of Russia. Now, one of the things to note about this is there's on the bottom with those three people, that one on the far left. If you look at his uniform and you look at the Russian uniforms, he's wearing exactly the same as a Russian uniform.
Yeah,
it's just he's wearing it in blue. That's how close the military uniforms were at the time. And you see this across the Silesian uniforms were very similar. This gets even more bonkers when you start to look at, find another image that I had here of, and note the colours on this uniform.
All right, let's see what we got here.
All right, see if I can
load.
Do this. Right, so, and then what we do is we show this chap. Right, so,
all right,
few very important things about this. So, this guy is actually a German Lancer. Several very important points about this. That hat that he's wearing, that's a traditional Polish hat. It came through from the Polish. Lancers often used to wear them. It's a chapka, it's called. Note the colours, yellow and blue. He's basically covered in the Ukrainian flag as well. So all of this influence here, that guy is actually a Brunswick Lancer. Now, Brunswick is German, more German than any German thing that would ever German. Now, the most interesting thing about this is this changing as I flick through. Yes, it is, right. So,
Well, Dungeon Dan says the uniform looks like like a colonial uniform.
Yes, it did. So where
it's a good observation there. It kind of is, yeah.
Here we are. Here's a guy. It's a reenactment version of it. So let's bring this chap up.
Prussian officer uniform. Oh right. Yeah, that's.
So what's interesting is it's Prussian, but that's very much Brunswick. Now look at his shako. Look at the hat. Look at the symbol in the middle of it. Skull and crossbones.
That's skull and crossbones.
Yeah, the Death's Head skull. So that unit, they wore black uniforms and had a silver skull as their insignia. Now, I think we all know what that became in World War II, and that's where that's where the root of that comes from. But I was showing those images to show. So that Prussia was very German. When we think of Germans and that very specific upper class German, the nobles in World War One and World War Two, like your Baron von Richthofens and your people like that. It's the Prussians we really think of, and those Prussian nobles are actually part of this same grouping that came out of this original Kievan Rus, and all of this stuff as well that was heavily influenced by the same influences of the Cossacks, and in return, the Cossacks influenced them with their dress. So as you can see, there's lots of influences in the way that people were dressed from the earlier time periods as well. And that moved west through Europe, and it was a very heavy cultural influence went west through Europe as well. Men wearing corsets actually was a big thing in the Russian military in the late 1700s, to the point of there was a massive issue with their officers fainting. But you end up with and this is what I was saying before about even modern Cossacks in war. I know obviously he's probably not wearing that into combat. He's probably not going direct combat. After all, he was a leader. But you get this strong cultural identity, and it's had some influences across certain things that we've seen. The way that we used cavalry from the 1700s, the way that our cavalry dressed from the 1700s, even into modern uniforms, and the way that modern parade uniforms have come out of that type of dress, especially from the cavalry, because it was that sort of time period where they solidified what was a parade uniform as well. So the Cossacks have had a huge influence on the militaries of Europe from that time period. Obviously, some influence has gone the other way, but they're integral really into how Western military developed in the 17 and 1800s, even though it wasn't a direct, all right, so we've got our own unit of Cossacks. It was only really the Russians that had their own units of Cossacks, because, well, Russia at that point, it was the Empire of Russia as well, so it included Ukraine at that point, because it included like half of Poland as well. But you end up with these influences then into Prussia, and that then brings it into Western Europe, because Prussia then takes over Germany, and then there's influence from Germany, and then the British monarchs then become German. So we've got that influence coming over here as well. So you've got this whole meld of, you can see where it jumps through from these very early Cossacks, and this styling and how we think of it. And those top knots and the moustaches, that's Mongolian, that's Far East. So it's come all the way from the Far East with those influences and come through. The curved swords from the Turkish groups as well. And sort of Kazakhstan's now where you really see what's left of this. Kazakhstan, Georgia, the bits of Ukraine that are currently in battle. So this map is quite an important one that I'm going to show now. So this shows some areas that were really, really important to the Cossacks. So if we do this, and it's this one. So it's this map here. When it comes up. So one of the things when this map loads is you've got these regions. So
here we go.
Here we are. Right. So this map in the yellow, it's showing large areas of where the Cossacks controlled. Basically, that was Cossack territory. So if you remember that map we saw earlier of the Kievan Rus, that border of the Kievan Rus is the white part of Ukraine that goes down south. That's essentially that border. That's where, so this is where the those Cossacks were. So it's the plains just north of Georgia, and we saw those bits of Sevastopol coming in there with the influences. And what's really interesting about this is the regions that in the current Ukrainian war that are really seeing the heaviest fighting and that are contested regions are essentially these regions. It's like, apart from obviously you've got some exceptions, Sevastopol, and then some of the lands to the direct south of Kiev as well. But all of these regions with hash marks around the edge, and then all of this yellow bit to the east of the river, because this was when you had that split in Cossacks I was talking earlier, especially into the 20s, that was that river that they were split across. One side fighting with Russia and one side not fighting with Russia. So Russia is wanting the stuff east of that river. And they keep harking on about like history and how it wasn't history. And this is partly what they're getting at. If you had this split between the Cossacks to the east of the river, sided with the Russians, and to the west, sided with the Ukrainians and Polish on the other side as well. So when you see those regions, what they're trying, the Russians are trying to do is rebuild that early Russian Empire by regaining these lands because they're influenced the Cossacks. So that chap I showed earlier with the classic Cossack hat, he was one of those Cossacks of these Eastern pro-Russian people who was in that region as well. And you find that while across Ukraine, the majority of people speak Russian, it's in these areas to the east where they're more likely to speak Russian. So this influence and this fighting between the Cossack tribes has come full circle and is now an influence between two modern states in their war, and where you can see some people siding with one group and some people siding with another group. Now, one of the other things that comes up really importantly is the people that are living in that yellow area in the Ukrainian conflict are a fiercely independent people with a strong military aspect to what they do. We are independent. We don't want to be ruled by anyone, basically. And we've decided the path we want to go, and we want to have that autonomy. Yeah, we don't mind being part of the state as long as we're kind of autonomous. And but we'll do with our military what we want to do with our military, because they are the descendants of the Cossacks who settled in the region. And as soon as you understand this bit of history, the Ukrainian conflict makes so much more sense.
That's right. And now, and this is where we kind of get into the modern stuff. You know, the modern. And by the way, Crimea. It's been so highly contested. Crimea.
Crimean region was that was the first one. So in the 1850s in the Crimean War, that was the first time that we formally allied with France and we fought against the Russians. So I'm sure people know the charge of the Light Brigade. That's from that war. That was the Battle of Sevastopol. That was, and that was someone wrote the order down wrong. That was the complete mess. Cavalry charge. But there's loads of influences through that as well. If you look at some of the most famous Russians, think like Tolstoy, people like that, they served in Sevastopol. They served around the time of that war and in that conflict, because the Russians always had a fort there, and that was one of the places that you got sent. So you got these very, very famous Russians who we know from literary areas came from this region or were sent to this region as part of the military. So it's got a very strong cultural influence as well.
Right. So, but it kind of makes me think: were there any natural resources in Crimea? In that particular region that made it such a hot spot?
Okay, I could do the joke of the Golden Fleece.
The Golden Fleece.
Yeah, because that's only just down the coast from there. That's literally the bottom right point of this map is where traditionally the Golden Fleece is from. And Jason's wife Medea came from the sorceress Medea, very famous in Greek mythology. But that region is fishing in the Black Sea, the connections through the rivers as well, because that big old river is exactly how the Vikings got down there, which is where you see the influence of this Kievan Rus built up by the Scandinavian peoples, and why it is so integral to the area. The area around Sevastopol in this Crimean region, a bit at the bottom, is very good for shipping. You've got a sea, so you're not beholden to ocean waves, but you still need bigger ships. But it can be sort of quieter and more sheltered along some of that coastline, picking the right bits. So you can have really good ports. Obviously, the southern parts of Ukraine are known for oil. It's why the Blitzkrieg in 1942 in Operation Barbarossa, why they went directly across this, and how they end up fighting at Stalingrad, which, if I look at this map properly, I can't read Cyrillic. So let's not do that. Well, not anymore anyway. Essentially, this is that region. So your famous battles of Kursk, which was redone in the Ukrainian war. There was another tank battle at Kursk, the biggest tank battle in history. You've got Stalingrad, biggest battle in history, full stop, World War II. In this region, because it was known for its oil and for its grain. So the whole idea that the Germans were trying to do was take this land, starve out Russia, destroy their supplies. To gain the oil, was the Germans needed oil, but also it cuts off the oil and the grain supplies that go north into the rest of Russia to support their soldiers. It also has all the ports in the south where you can then start trading down into the Mediterranean, which then allows you some strong trade with the African nations and around the Mediterranean basin, which has always been a strong trading area, as we've known through so much of the ancient history that we've looked at as well. So it's quite a critical region as well, because it's also our dividing line. So one of the things that's come up with the current war in Ukraine is Ukraine's a no-fly zone. Can't fly over it. You've got Belarus is a puppet state of Russia, and that's north of there. So essentially, you can't go east on a plane. You have to go north or south and then fly around. You have to fly around this whole central part of this connection between Asia and Europe, and this is that dividing area. It's a easy way to get through. Nice big open flat areas. So if you've got cavalry, brilliant. Modern days, nice area to put a road in. You're not having to worry about that. Easy place to put a rail system in. You've got ports, so you can ship stuff in whenever you want. It's from a logistics perspective and from an area perspective, it was the breadbasket of Europe. One of the things when the Ukraine war started, traditionally in the UK, prices of oil you use for cooking are olive oil, very expensive, quite fancy. No, you can get some cheap stuff. You then have vegetable oil, which most people use for cooking. You then have sunflower oil, which used to be a little bit cheaper than vegetable oil or around the same price. As soon as the war in Ukraine started, sunflower oil became basically the same price as olive oil, because sunflowers is a Ukrainian thing.
This comment explains it all. Aiden just explained what most people wondered. Why is Ukraine always in conflict? It is a prime location for travel and trade with the ocean and huge river running across through it. Control the area, control the Congress. Not to mention, we get a whole lot of wheat from Ukraine. They produce a whole lot of wheat as well, Ukraine.
Wheat and sunflower oil. And if you go right the way back to the Vikings and even further back into the Bronze Age, this is the trade route for amber. This is how you get amber from Scandinavia and North Russia. It's how you get that into this region as well. That's where the amber came from as well. So
Dungeon Dan,
very expensive.
You pretty much that's what this episode was all about. Why is Ukraine always in conflict? And there we go. It's the Nan is perfect. It's such good Nan. Well, one more fun fact before we go. The politics of Ukraine are unique in that they don't have the same beliefs that we have. They don't have political parties like all these. They don't believe in politics like the Western world. They're more inclined to center around civilizational and strategic orientation rather than economic and socio-political agendas.
Yeah,
So it's a fun fact right there.
So one of this goes back to the Cossacks of the region as well. This like fiercely independent groupings, people.
Exactly.
And it's obviously it's a post-Soviet state as well. So a lot of post-Soviet states went quite far right. It's like we discussed with a lot of South American countries. As soon as you have a really bad left-wing government, they tend to swing all the way to the right, and they have a bad right-wing government, you swing all the way to the left. So you have this sort of swing backwards and forwards.
Exactly.
So a lot of Eastern Europe was quite right-wing. Poland's known for it at the moment as well, of being quite traditionalist and quite right-wing in their outlook these days. And part of that is a huge reaction to being a post-communist state.
Post-communist state, right. Ukraine is kind of special in that they haven't really followed that. They're kind of to themselves.
They've
but they haven't gone. They're more in the sense of we're just gonna keep to ourselves. It's kind of unique if you ask me. That's kind of a unique aspect about the country,
which is surprising when you consider the Moldova and Transnistria on their southwestern border. Transnistria is still a full-on communist state. When the Soviet Union fell, Transnistria did not get the message. They were like, no, we're still a communist state. And if you want to go and see what Soviet Russia was like in the 70s, go to Transnistria if they'd let you in.
If they let you in.
Way of doing it, you have to look it up of how to get in there. It's the major rail route that goes into Ukraine, actually goes through Transnistria. If you go up through Romania,
I never knew that. Wow, that's good. That's interesting to know.
It's a really, really super interesting place. Wow. It's almost theme parky as well. I think it's one of those things they believe it, but I think they use it as a gimmick at the same time of, well, we are like this, yes, but people come here because it's like this, so it's a bit softer. You're not going to get thrown in a gulag for saying the wrong thing, but you think you might be sent to a gulag type of thing. But it's a really interesting, because it's quite a small place as well. And it's one of the things people often said about communism. The problem with communism is when you expand to large groups of people, it just falls apart. When you've got communism works in small groups of people. Like a friendship group can be very communist. That's easy. Like if you look at people in your house, that's a microcosm of communism. You can do that very easily as soon as you expand it out to larger regions. And it's one of the thoughts on why Transnistria was able to carry it on in that mold and get rid of some of the horrendous trappings of it, because they just fell into that. That just became how they lived. And it was more of a community thing. So they were able to keep up certain aspects of communism and to somehow make it work. Well, it works for them. As far as I know, I haven't had a revolution. So but yeah, it's a really interesting region. It's surrounded by all these different places. Obviously, Russia went straight far right as well. Obviously, with Putin and his some of the worst bits of the Soviet Union. He reinstated the KGB.
Although some people will argue that's more extreme left because he was a part of the KGB, which was the Soviets.
So it's even more interesting than that. So, a side point before we end, Putin was, if you look back from childhood, he always wanted to be a member of the KGB.
Yep.
So, to become a member of the KGB, part of that is you had to join the military. They were conscripted anyway. So it's why Putin was a fighter pilot for many years. He ended up joining the KGB and working his way through. Now, the most interesting thing about this is he got introduced to the important people of the Russian Soviet. His uncle was Stalin's personal chef. That's how he met them. He met people like Molotov. I think it was Molotov he met. don't think it was Beria. I think Beria was dead by then. But those really, really important, influential names of high-level KGB and things, he met those people because his family was obviously part of that clique. So he's harking back to things from his childhood. He always wanted to be a member of the KGB. So obviously he changed the FSB to the KGB, and that was after he assassinated the Russian ambassador in Turkey in 2000 something. When he invaded Crimea, just before that. That was the setup for the invasion of Crimea and the ultimate invasion of Ukraine as well. Yeah, it's like if you look at that type of thing, it's really interesting to see how it all connects and how all of those regions that all of this is talking about. Because you think Stalin was from Georgia as well, so he's from this region. Stalin was essentially had some sort of Cossack blood in him because he was from these group of people. So you get these people that connected to that, and it's why you get all of these influences still in the region, why it's such a focus now in the modern period. When you look at the backgrounds and histories of some of the leaders involved and some of the major actors in the area, even down to Turkey, some of the Turkish ministers that were involved that go back and the people that they knew beforehand as well. So this whole independent Cossacks movement and who's going to be in charge of them is still alive and well, and that's part of this conflict as well. It's an often overlooked part of this conflict, but it's a very important part of this conflict of how these people want to see themselves ruled as well, rather than being used as political football, which is just part of the course for the Cossacks since about 1400 and something, when they were first identified as a proper group. As well. But yeah, on that pretty dark note.
Yeah, I know. I think that's going to be it for this one on that pretty dark note. And before I end it, we just hope for the best for Ukraine. They've been for a whole night. We just hope for the best for them. Regardless of what happens. I do feel for them people. They're doing the best they can. So. You came up with an interesting idea as the South American nations went far to the right after the communism, and that's actually going to bring that. So that's actually going to fill in nicely or flow in nicely to the next episode, as we're going to be talking about why are Latinos and Hispanics not a monolith, and we're going to get into the reasons why we're not a monolith, because. I don't want to say I'm sick and tired of it, but I think people get the wrong idea that we're a monolith, that, just because we see what happens to one group of Hispanics, it applies to all of us, and that's just not the case. We're not a monolith. There's a whole different rainbows of different people. So, we're going to get into all that, and that should be a pretty fun episode, maybe a little controversial at times, but, it's gonna be fun.
Always do a little bit.
So next, in a couple of weeks, we're gonna talk about why Latin America is not a monolith. I'm sure you've been paying attention, Aiden, to South America going far to the right. Chile went far right.
Yeah. I've been, especially since those episodes, I've always kept my eye out for the news. Venezuela might be going to the right after they got rid of Maduro. We'll see what happens there. Bolivia went far right, and people are saying Colombia is next. Colombia might be next. Could well be. And if people come to the next episode, they will find out our thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, we'll find out our thoughts about that. Yeah, I got some feelings about that, but I'm not going to ruin it now. So, guys, thank you very much, Dungeon Dan, as always, for watching. Lee was having some problems watching. That might be on his end. He says it keeps freezing. Yeah, that might be on his end. Don't worry, Lee. Once we get out of here, you'll be able to watch the replay. So, yeah. So we'll see you in a couple of weeks but until then, guys, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your weekend. This has been Saturnian Naturalist Maximus. That is the gate Aiden Cornier. And reminder, this is episode number 46. We're getting close to episode 50. 4 more episodes. Yeah, that's right. We're getting there, guys. But and by the way, I just looked at my calendar, Aiden. Next episode will be the 31st of January. So we're gonna have done 3 episodes in January. How you like that?
Oh, wow.
That doesn't usually work out that way.
No, that's quite mental, actually.
48, 49. Yep. So and we have the date for the 50th episode. Either March 14th or March 15th. One of those 2 days will be episode 50. So just to give you guys a heads up. But until then, guys, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Take care, guys.
All right.